So the Catholic Church was going in one direction from 1563 on. The Lutheran Church, okay, now that Martin Luther is dead, what are we going to do? Because he taught us certain things. Now, do we just dissolve and go back to being Catholics again? No, there has to be some way for us to define what does it mean to be a good Lutheran, a Protestant, a good Protestant. So, in terms of Orthodoxy, we're also talking about Lutheran Orthodoxy. What does it mean to be an Orthodox Lutheran? After Luther's death in 1546, Philip Melanchthon was the one who carried on the torch. He was the main interpreter of Luther's theology. And he wrote this textbook that we used for years, Philip Melanchthon. He wrote the Lutheran textbook, if you will. Debates arose between his followers, who were the Philippists, Philip Melanchthon, his followers were the Philippists, and the strict Lutherans, those who believed themselves to be Orthodox, because Melanchthon didn't reject dirty reason in the same way that Luther did. For Luther, it wasn't about reason, it was ultimately about faith. Your faith is going to save you. They also continued cordial relations with Erasmus. Do you remember Erasmus? When Erasmus had to choose which was right, Catholic Church or Lutherans, which did Erasmus choose? I'm down with it, Catholics. And so, because they were now building relationships with Erasmus, wait a minute. He also spoke of human cooperation and salvation. Human cooperation and salvation works. What are you doing to earn your salvation? And so Melanchthon then distinguished between those things that are central to the gospel and those things that are peripheral. What are those things that are important for you to be saved? And what are those other things in the Bible that are in the Bible but are not so important for you to be saved? Follow me? Which one should we be following most closely? Those things are important for our salvation. Strict Lutherans then, the Orthodox Lutherans, accused him, Luther's follower, Melanchthon, of forsaking several elements of Luther's teaching and of being not a Lutheran, but a Calvinist. Ouch! Here he is, just trying to do his best to continue the legacy of Luther, and now there are other divisions within the Lutheran Church. Follow me? We Catholics were not the only one of the divided church. The next generation then tried to reconcile Luther and Melanchthon. Okay, it seems that they had different views. How do we try to bring them together? And they created Lutheran Orthodoxy and Lutheran Scholasticism. This then is the era of scholars trying to defend Lutheranism. In the same way that we Catholics had scholars trying to defend Catholicism, now Lutherans had scholars, scholastics, defending Lutheranism. And so that would become their focus during the 17th and 18th centuries, coming up with their own systematic theology, their own theology on what it means to be a good Lutheran. George Calixtus is the last name that we have in this chapter on Lutheran Orthodoxy. George Calixtus, from 1586 to 1656, built relationships with other confessions meaning other Christians. Just because we don't all agree, the question is, what can we agree on? Can we build bridges here? Because he believed, how crazy was this idea, that the bitter attacks of some people against others, that was anti-Christian, right? This fighting that's going on between us as Christians, that's actually un-Christian. That was the thought. The fighting between Christians is un-Christian. That was Calixtus. Calixtus advocated, he said, wait a minute, the same as Melanchthon, right? Melanchthon said, those things that are in Scriptures that are important to salvation, we should be paying attention to that, not to those peripheral things. He said something similar. He said, not everything in Scripture is to be believed with equal importance. For instance, when Jesus says, if your eye is an occasion of sin, pluck it out. Does anyone need a spoon to pluck out his or her eye around this table? There are some things in Scripture that we don't believe and don't do in the same way that we do other things in Scripture. So he said, that which relates to salvation is fundamental and necessary. Pay attention to those things. And so what is heresy? If we're talking about the Orthodox Lutheran position, what does it mean to be a heretic in the Lutheran tradition then? Heresy is denying things that are essential for salvation. This is what's most important, our salvation, our going to heaven. If you deny one of these essential things that will help people to get to heaven, then you are a heretic. Anything less than that is simply an error. You're not a heretic if you don't, if you eat sausage on a Friday of Lent, you're not a heretic. You might be in error, but you're not a heretic. Heretic is those things that deal with our salvation.
Can we get a list of that, please?
There you go. Think about it in your own life, right? Okay, there are some things that I get really fixated about, that I'm doing these bad things. Okay, think about it in the end. If it impacts your salvation, then maybe you should lose sleep on it. If not, then get on with your life. He also talked about what he called the consensus of the first 5 centuries. First 5 centuries, Christians seemed to be together on certain issues. We weren't so divided yet. So if there's any question about what we should believe, look to the consensus of the first 5 centuries. Maybe that's what we should be believing. They taught us what essentially we have to believe to be saved. And so how interesting that Calixtus, in saying that we should go back to the tradition of those first 5 centuries, what was it that Luther said? Sola Scriptura, go back to scriptures. What was the Catholic answer? Scripture and tradition. Fascinating. What is Calixtus advocating for? Tradition. Go back and look at the first 5 centuries, the tradition of the church during the first 5 centuries. Calixtus' position soon came to be known as syncretism, because who is this guy? Is he really Lutheran or is he Catholic? Looking back at the tradition of the church, that is not a Lutheran position. He became known as a syncretist, trying to bring together Lutheran and other thoughts. And so his work largely died out except for the King of Poland attempting to use his works to reunite the Catholics and the Protestants. Why would you use his works to unite the Catholics and the Protestants? Look at his work. Look at the first 5 tradition, the first 5 centuries of the church. Look at that tradition. Maybe I can use him to bring together the Catholics and the Protestants here in Poland. Did it work? Didn't work. And so Calixtus has largely been forgotten in history. I bet you've never heard of Calixtus. Or if you did, you forgot about him. That's essentially his place in history. Forgotten.